My life was a mess. There's no other way to say it. Every morning I woke up with a pit in my stomach, dreading the day ahead. The anxiety would gnaw at me, growing stronger as I checked my bank balance, which was always lower than I remembered. I felt like I was drowning in a sea of bills, debts, and financial obligations I couldn't escape from. No matter how hard I tried, I was always one step behind, never catching up, always sinking. I was ashamed. I avoided phone calls from friends because I couldn't afford to go out. I lied to my parents about how well I was doing because the truth would have shattered their hearts. The worst part, I was angry. Angry at myself for getting into this mess. Angry at the world for not giving me a break. And angry at everyone else who seemed to have it all together while I was barely surviving. I wasn't lazy. I had a decent job and I worked hard. But the harder I worked, the more elusive financial stability seemed. It was as if I were running on a treadmill, always sweating, always pushing, but never getting anywhere. Month after month, I scraped by, paying the minimum on my credit cards, juggling rent, utilities, and food with whatever was left. I became a master of survival, but that's all it was, surviving, not living. Then, one cold November night, I hit rock bottom. I remember it vividly. The wind howled outside my tiny apartment, and the heating barely worked. I sat on my lumpy couch, wrapped in a blanket, staring at a stack of bills on the coffee table. My heart raced as I added them up in my head, a futile exercise in horror. I didn't have enough to cover everything, not even close. My phone buzzed. It was a text from my landlord reminding me that rent was due in 3 days. I felt the blood drain from my face. I couldn't pay it. Not this time. There was nothing left to juggle, nothing left to stretch. I felt a wave of despair crash over me, and tears welled up in my eyes. I cried that night, a deep, soul-crushing cry. I cried for the years of financial mismanagement, for the fear and shame that had become my constant companions, and for the future that seemed so hopeless. I cried because I didn't know what to do anymore. I cried because I was scared. But in the midst of that despair, something shifted. It was a small spark, a glimmer of determination. I don't know where it came from, but in that dark moment, I made a decision. I wasn't going to let my life continue down this path. I wasn't going to be a victim of my circumstances anymore. I was going to fight back. I was going to take control of my finances, no matter how impossible it seemed. The next morning, I woke up with swollen eyes and a pounding headache. But that small spark of determination was still there. I knew I had to start somewhere, so I did the one thing that terrified me the most. I faced my finances head on. I gathered every bill, every bank statement, every credit card statement, and spread them out on the table. It was overwhelming, and for a moment, I almost gave up, but I didn't. Instead, I created a list, a terrifying, raw, honest list of every debt I had, every monthly expense, and every penny I earned. Seeing the numbers in black and white was sobering. My debt was massive, much larger than I had allowed myself to believe. But instead of despairing, I did something different. I looked at the numbers and asked myself a question. What can I control? The answer wasn't easy, but it was there. I couldn't control my past mistakes, and I couldn't magically make more money appear. But I could control how I spent every coin from that moment forward. And that's when it hit me, the habit that would change my life forever. I decided to adopt a practice that seemed so simple, so basic, but it was the hardest thing I had ever committed to: budgeting. Now, I know what you're thinking. Budgeting? That's the big life-changing habit? Trust me, I was skeptical too. I had tried budgeting before, half-heartedly, but I never stuck to it. This time, though, was different. This time it was do or die. Literally, I started by researching everything I could about budgeting. I watched videos, read blogs, and even checked out library books on the subject. I learned about different budgeting methods: zero-based budgeting, the 50-30-20 rule, cash envelopes, you name it, I studied it. But the more I learned, the more overwhelmed I became. There were so many options, and none of them seemed to fit my chaotic financial situation. Then I found something that resonated with me. A simple, straightforward method that focused on one key principle: every dollar has a job. It wasn't about fancy spreadsheets or complicated formulas. It was about assigning every single dollar of my income a specific purpose before I even had the chance to spend it. Rent, utilities, groceries, debt payments. Every dollar had a job, and I wasn't allowed to deviate from that plan. It sounded restrictive, and at first it was. I hated it, but I knew I had no other choice. I was fighting for my life, and this was my weapon. So I created my first budget. It was a mess, full of mistakes and unrealistic expectations. But it was a start. The first month was brutal. I had to confront all my bad habits: impulse spending, eating out, mindlessly swiping my credit card without thinking about the consequences. I had to say no to things I wanted, things that felt like they would bring me some small joy in my otherwise stressful life. It was like going through financial detox, and it hurt. But as the weeks passed, something incredible started to happen. For the first time, I began to feel a sense of control over my money. Instead of money controlling me, I was the one in charge. I knew exactly where my money was going, and that knowledge was empowering. I wasn't just surviving anymore. I was planning, I was strategizing, I was making progress. I set small goals for myself, tiny, almost laughable goals. Pay an extra $10 on my credit card this month. Save $5 on groceries by cutting out junk food. Put $20 into a savings account, even if it meant eating noodles for a week. Each time I met a goal, no matter how small, I felt a surge of pride and confidence. I started to believe that maybe, just maybe, I could dig myself out of this hole. Months passed, and I stuck to my budget like my life depended on it, because it did. The changes were slow at first, almost imperceptible, but they were there. My credit card balance started to creep downwards. I stopped living paycheck to paycheck. I had a few $100s in savings, a tiny safety net, but it was mine. And for the first time in years, I slept peacefully at night. The real test came about 6 months into my budgeting journey. My car broke down, a complete transmission failure. In the past, this would have been a financial disaster, a crisis that sent me spiraling back into debt and despair. But this time, I was ready. I had my emergency fund, small but sufficient. I had a plan. I knew what I needed to do, and I did it. I paid for the repairs without a single swipe of the credit card. No debt, no panic, just calm, calculated action. That moment was a turning point. I realized then that budgeting wasn't just about controlling my money. It was about controlling my life. It was about taking back my power, my dignity, and my future. It was about freedom. As the months turned into a year, the changes in my life were dramatic. I paid off my smallest credit card completely, a milestone that had seemed impossible not long ago. I started building a real emergency fund, not just a few $100s, but enough to cover 3 months of expenses. I began to dream again, to think about the future without fear. Maybe I could travel one day, or go back to school, or start a business. The possibilities that once felt like fantasies were becoming realistic goals. My relationships improved too. I no longer avoided my friends. I started being honest with them about my financial situation. And to my surprise, they were supportive. Some of them even asked for advice on how to manage their own finances. My relationship with my parents also changed. I stopped lying to them, and instead, I shared my progress. They were proud of me, and that meant the world. But the biggest change was internal. I wasn't that scared, desperate person anymore. I had confidence, a sense of self-worth that I hadn't felt in years. I knew I could handle whatever life threw at me because I had proven it to myself. I wasn't just surviving, I was thriving. As I sit here now, reflecting on my journey, I can hardly believe how far I've come. The habit that started as a desperate last-ditch effort to save my life has become a cornerstone of who I am. Budgeting, that simple, often overlooked practice, has transformed everything. It taught me discipline, patience, and the value of small, consistent actions. It gave me the power to take control of my life, to turn things around when everything seemed hopeless. I won't pretend that everything is perfect. I still have debt to pay off, and there are months when I slip up, when old habits try to sneak back in, but I'm no longer afraid of those moments. I know that I have the tools and the mindset to get back on track, to keep moving forward. If there's one thing I've learned through all of this, it's that change doesn't happen overnight. It's not about big, dramatic gestures. It's about the small, seemingly insignificant choices we make every day. It's about committing to a process, even when it's hard, even when it feels like nothing is working. It's about believing that you have the power to change your life, even when the evidence suggests otherwise. I often think back to that cold November night, to the moment when I thought I had reached the end of my rope. I didn't know it then, but that moment was the beginning of a new chapter, the start of a journey that would change my life in ways I couldn't have imagined. It wasn't easy and it wasn't quick, but it was worth it. So if you're reading this and you're feeling like I did, lost, scared, and overwhelmed by your financial situation, I want you to know that there is hope. There is a way out, a way to take control, to reclaim your life. It starts with one small step, one decision to try something different, to break the cycle. For me, that step was budgeting. It was the personal finance habit that changed everything. It wasn't glamorous or exciting, but it was powerful. It gave me my life back. And if it can do that for me, it can do it for you too. Take control of your money, and you'll take control of your life. It's not easy, but it's possible. And when you look back, you'll see that the struggle, the sacrifice, and the hard work were all worth it. Because on the other side of that effort is freedom, and there's nothing more valuable than that.